Good afternoon once again, and welcome to this meeting, which is a meeting to assist in unpacking the fiscal consolidation program that has been put in place to address Kenya's public debt crisis. We use the term public debt crisis, even though the government uses a different term. My name is Wanjiru Gikonyo. I'm the National Coordinator with the Institute for Social Accountability. And this meeting has been organized under the Okoa Uchumi campaign. The Okoa Uchumi campaign is a civil society platform committed towards working with stakeholders to address and redress Kenya's public debt crisis. The coalition seeks to push for political accountability and to bolster constitutional safeguards in public debt management as a means to debt sustainability through balanced and equitable budgets. Today, we'll be receiving a report from Dr. Stephen Jaramba, who will take us through a review and analysis of the Fiscal Consolidation Program of Kenya, as we seek to interrogate the extent to which it responds to the real needs on the ground, the extent to which it gives us proposals and remedies that are suitable for our economic situation, and to inform ourselves of the actions we need to take to effectively engage in the process, hold the process to account, monitor the process in line with the reflections we'll have from Dr. Jaramba. Dr. Jaramba will be assisted by two discussants who we are equally happy to have here. Dr. Simon Githuku, who is with the private sector. He's with the Kenya Association of Manufacturers, and we'll be hearing from him with regard to private sector views, the views of the Kenya Association of Manufacturers and private sector as a whole on the debt crisis and the fiscal consolidation measures and how they're affecting business and the business environment and what they'd like to see done. So we'll be hearing his reflections with regard to the response to the report. We'll also have reflections from Kwame Owino, who is with the Institute for Social Accountability, the Institute for Economic Affairs. Apologies for that slip. And he's also very well known to most of us due to his expertise on economic matters and debt matters in particular. So we'll be hearing from Kwame Owino, the ED of IEA. I'll just make a few remarks to kind of set the tone for our meeting, and just a little bit of thinking behind the Okoa Uchumi campaign. First, the campaign is concerned, as are most Kenyans, about the expensive commercial debt that has flooded into Kenya. We are also concerned that a lot of this debt has been directed towards populist presidential flagship projects, several of which have been cited in the Auditor General reports and may be deemed as examples of budgeted corruption, and others whose productivity and sustainability is questionable. We are also concerned that the government has imprudently accepted large, costly, and risky investments without transparency in decision-making. As a result of these actions, Kenya is drowning in debt and in high risk of debt distress due to the cost of debt repayments. So the rising debt repayments and attendant policies have negatively affected the business environment, leading to falling revenues, reduced social investments, increasing socio-economic vulnerabilities that have hit households and businesses equally hard. This situation, of course, has then been compounded by the COVID pandemic and its impacts. So in response to this crisis over the past 2 years, we have seen the government outline and institute several measures to address the debt crisis. And in April 2021 of this year, Kenya entered into an IMF-sponsored fiscal consolidation and structural adjustment program. The program aims to stabilize the economy and set a basis for resurgence of growth and shared prosperity. So what is fiscal consolidation? Fiscal consolidation is the set of government policies aimed at reducing the budget deficit and the debt burden to manageable levels. Fiscal consolidation programs have a poor history on the African continent because of the negative effects of the structural adjustment programs of the 90s. Many of those effects still linger today. I was in a conversation where an expert cited the restrictions placed by under the structural adjustment program of the 1990s on cooperatives, because cooperatives, of course, have been deemed and may be deemed an important hub of creating economic empowerment, especially in the agricultural sector and in the informal sector. But structural adjustment restrictions of the 1990s forced government to change its policies on cooperatives, reducing their effectiveness, reducing the support to them, reducing a key pillar of the economic takeoff that our country would have needed. So these kind of misplaced policies have an impact till this day. Another was also restrictions on extension services in the agricultural sector, which were cut back and continue to have an effect. In fact, one of the big contributions the county governments have made is to again begin building up these extension services in agriculture and livestock keeping. But obviously, you can't account for the decades lost in misplaced policies. So as we look at the structural adjustment programs, we are concerned about the recommendations that are being made, the remedies that are proposed. I was in a meeting this morning, we had an internal meeting, and one of the questions being raised is that is government so desperate that they will offer anything and take anything and simply seek to get money in to avoid the risk of default, and in the process agree to policies that will undermine and impact the economy, possibly after this government leaves office, because this government needs to save political face. And if this is the case, then we have a responsibility to call it out and to ensure that the remedies and the policies that are being proposed are inclusive and support sustainable development. Research tells us that fiscal consolidation to be effective is based on certain good practices, such as fiscal consolidation programs should be based on agreements on the service delivery arrangements, such as those I've mentioned. How are we restructuring? How do we restructure sectors and protect devolved governance? For instance, you saw in the papers just yesterday that the Minister of Education has put a stop to the restructuring of the higher education structures at the tertiary level, saying that there needs to be a gazette notice for such restructuring of the boards that manage university education. So this is a very fundamental point, because you also are aware that under the fiscal consolidation program, the recommendation is to privatize certain institutions, and the 4 key universities were identified as those to be privatized. How do you privatize tertiary education, university education in a country? And from what the statistics are telling us, less than 1 million hold degrees. And we are trying to get more people into the TVETs and also into the universities. Are we not supposed to have proactive policies that support public education institutions to be vibrant and give the best quality, as opposed to making them the preserve of the rich? So a good fiscal consolidation process will secure agreement on these service delivery arrangements. And in my view, those in turn will accord and be aligned to the constitutional dispensation. Again, it will take an evidence-based approach. Again, it will take an evidence-based approach. The meeting I was in, we were in this morning, we were talking about voodoo economics. This is economics that has no grounding, where you're told things by government that don't align. You read the budget policy statement or the estimates, and those assumptions seem to be pulled out from magic. So this voodoo economics is our fiscal consolidation program informed by voodoo economics. Again, under our constitutional dispensation, under Article 201, under Article 1, and various other provisions of the Constitution, and as we were reminded in the BBI judgment, the direct constituent power of the citizen reigns supreme. So sovereignty is vested in the people of Kenya, and we have a role and a right in the fiscal consolidation process. Is this the case? Or are we being treated to tokenism, where we are invited to give submissions? We do a lot of work, we mobilize, we give the submissions, and government goes ahead and does exactly what it wants. And I'll give an example. Again, we made submissions into the Finance Act, the Finance Bill, where we made an argument against the increasing of certain taxes that would have impacted youth, women, informal sectors negatively. Indeed, the Finance Committee listened to our appeal and did not institute the bread tax, the tax on the borders, but they then went ahead to institute taxes that would affect the very same sectors. So they didn't pick the ones that were out in the public domain, but they picked others. So the effect is the same. And this is the kind of public participation that makes a mockery of our engagement and of our constitution. A good fiscal consolidation program will also have enforcement mechanisms so that the promises made by government are enforceable. They are monitored and enforced. It will be based on an inclusive budget formulation process, and I've already spoken to that. The process will promote trust and legitimacy. And I'll leave that there. A good fiscal consolidation program will have strong leadership. In our case, we are concerned that the leaders who are responsible for this program, some of them are the ones who put us in this mess in the first place. How do we promote credibility of this process? A good fiscal consolidation program will have cross-partisanship so that the reforms being undertaken have consensus and are sustainable and won't be undone by the next administration, especially because we are 12 months or so away from an election. There'll be accountability for accountability for achieving results is supported by openness and transparency. And in this regard, I'd say the IMF has made very good strides in pushing for levels of accountability, making information available, making the benchmarks very available. But of course, we know that underlying these promises, there are still major transparency deficits around the contracts, around the commitments that government has made to support the debt. And those are the devil details. There's speculation, for instance, around the reason why all rail and major infrastructure has been consolidated under the treasury. The rail and shipping infrastructure has been consolidated under the management of the treasury. And this is allegedly linked to the promises made to the Chinese under the SGR, that possibly the Mombasa port collateralization needs to be linked to the entire system so that the economic value of this collateral is consolidated on paper, that the port itself is not enough. Now if this is the case, of course we speculate without information, but if this is the case, where is the accountability, the transparency? And can IMF then truly say that this program is based on principles of accountability when the government is undermining, is making promises it doesn't intend to keep, and government has specialized the game of doublespeak, and they do it better than anyone else. So these are the concerns we have around this program, and there are several others. And it is our hope that this process provides a basis for interrogating the fiscal consolidation program in Kenya and generating actionable recommendations. And as I proceed to welcome Dr. Jaramba, I wish first to apologize that our mobilization was slightly late. And of course, then we picked a rather inconvenient time, but we thank you for joining us nonetheless. Also, I apologize that the report we shared was a rough draft and has too many typos. And I hope that did not distract you from the excellent substance that it has. It's still a draft, we'll clean it up. But the main thrust of our meeting today is to receive the report from Dr. Stephen Jaramba. And so without further ado, I'd like to welcome him so that he can lead us through this report. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Wajiro, for that clear and direct submission. Indeed, as you are doing that, the submission, I was taken to thinking that what could actually be our main problem, especially given the recent happenings, and more so that case of reforms in the public universities. But at times I could ask myself whether we really are interested in the reformations, and also the question of fiscal consolidation, that if you keenly look at them, I ask the difference between the structural adjustment programs and the fiscal consolidations that currently we have, and we expect probably they will put us into a better position. So you find at the end of the day, and the question comes, is it the desire to acquire resources from IMF that the fiscal consolidation has actually been packaged? I think that has been a question that requires further interrogation, and that how come from the report that we don't have the review of the structural adjustment programs and why it was not fully implemented. So nevertheless, that I have just drawn from Wajiro's submission. For the moment, I intend to do a bit of the report analysis, or to bring out the main ideas that have been covered in the report. The basis of it being what the data in Kenya is saying, particularly pertaining the public debt. In so doing, of course, guided by the analysis of the fiscal consolidations, and try to answer the question, are they really going to help? Of course, with the assumption that the packaging of those resolutions, the packages of those kind of approach to economic recovery, there is goodwill. I think that's a major assumption, that the packaging of it, and therefore the forwarding of it to IMF has good intention. So in so doing, what we did is that we have two sections. We have two sessions that we are going to use to cover the entire paper. So for today, our main area is to look at the gaps and disconnect in the monetary policy. We also intend to look at the data, that is economic data, the Kenya macroeconomic data, and also fiscal data, particularly that of the government approach to data, to public debt management. And of course, suggest, according to the report, the main way to deal with the situation as at hand. Number two, we're also going to look at the options for expenditure rationalization, and looking at whether doing away with some of the projects could actually deal with the public debt issues in Kenya. Of course, again, we indulge into some discussion whether Kenya probably can benefit from debt relief. That is the intention for the first session, and that's what I intend to go through now. Of course, as a way of introduction, I would say that in Kenya, and according to the report, there is already a clear indication that Kenya is at high risk of financial crisis. Actually, I would want to call it financial crisis because it is a situation, financial crisis occurs in a situation when an economy is unable to service its debt. So in a situation when the country therefore is calling for external assistance, like what it has done to IMF, in a situation where it is calling for kind of debt relief or suspension of debt, then it is an indication that the economy therefore is unable to service its debt, and therefore is facing a clear financial crisis. So in that case, the question of whether Kenya is in economic crisis or public debt crisis, the report actually gave a clear yes, that there is already financial issues in Kenya. And if nothing is done, then it's going to lead to economic crisis. Now, public debt is acquired by any economy mainly to facilitate investment. Of course, a situation where there is a kind of a gap between the public need and the public savings, then it can go for, public can go for, or the economy can go for public debt, both domestic debt and external debt. Public debt, to start with, is not a bad thing. It depends on how it has been utilized. And mainly, and the justification for public debt is for purposes of investment, more so in the infrastructures. Now, these infrastructures majorly is what we call the enablers for the economy. So they are therefore used to stimulate economic growth, and it is in this economic growth that then the debts are paid. The debt capacity, because again, once we are talking about public debt, what then, when do we say then it is enough, or then you cannot proceed to further getting debt? From some of the, of course, clear former cases, of course, we look more from the economies that have documented financial crisis, some that has, of course, escaped from economic crisis, and even some that have forestalled an economic crisis. And one of the clear indicator that an economy can avoid getting into public debt is observance of debt capacity. And the debt capacity can actually be measured by use of economic growth. And mainly that's why we find that once you're talking about public debt, it is measured as a ratio or as a percentage of GDP. That is the size of the economy. Now, a situation when then the public debt is growing at a higher rate than the economic growth, it's already an indicator of a danger. And therefore, the measure of capacity is actually the size of the GDP of economy. Now, once you talk about public debt, we can look at it in two forms. We can talk about domestic debt. That is a situation when the government acquires debt from its citizen. In other words, we can say that the debt is composed or denominated in domestic currency. I would state that most of the time, then that debt is used as a form of stabilization, because it doesn't, the public debt, the public sector government don't have to acquire domestic debt, given that, of course, the currency it has is currency that already is in store, of course, through monetary authority. So it only acquires that public debt mainly to enable what we may call stabilization. And it is again acquired for purposes of stimulating economic saving, where, of course, by the fact that if an economy is over-consuming, then public sector can come in, withdraw some money, of course, by selling government security papers, and use the money or the resources that have been raised to do investments. So it can also be used to force what we may call the public savings. We have the other composition of public debt, which is now a foreign debt. A foreign debt has to be acquired through use of a foreign currency. I want to state clearly that domestic currency cannot pose any financial crisis. It cannot pose any financial crisis. Reason being that if the government finds itself in a situation when it's unable to service the public debt denominated in domestic currency, then it can simply resort to what you may call debt monetization. That is, it prints money to pay debt. Again, at times, some countries could have what we call a convertible currency. Convertible currency is that currency that can can be, or we call it, backed by use of gold most of the times. That is currency that is even universally acceptable. That is to say, anytime any other country would want to be paid, it can accept that country's currency. Reason being that it can be converted to mainly to gold, and you find that even when it comes to IMF, they receive those currency mainly as their stock. So we call them convertible by the fact that it can be used to pay any debt anywhere in the world. So, but for Kenya shillings, it is not convertible. Kenya shilling is only usable mainly within the borders. Outside the border, including TZ, it is not mainly used. Now, for Kenya scenario, the relationship that we have between the public debt and macroeconomic situation is that once we look at the debt side, we find that it has been growing. The debt, the public debt has been growing. And currently, of course, as per last year, that is 2020 June, it read 65.6% of gross domestic product. This is nominal gross domestic product. So we are talking about the entire public debt being more than the entire size of the economy. It is more than the entire size of the economy. That is by June 2020. Of course, we know that this one has gone far up because of recent acquisition of public debt. Now, the increment, if you look at the growth rate from the year 2013 to the year that is 2020, we would say that the debt, the public debt, has grown by 253.4%. That is the entire growth between the 2 years. That is the year 2013 to the year 2020. So, but if you look keenly at the economy, on the other hand, is that the economy has averagely just grown by an average, if you talk about average, below 5%. Now, of course, if you talk about what should push the public debt for over that period without much of maybe stimulating economic growth as well, that's the question that this study went looking at. What is actually pushing this public debt growth? But before answering that, of course, the composition of this public debt was quite important. Reason being that we may not be much at risk of domestic debt. And as I've already stated, that the money domestically, if it does not move out of the economy and circulate within, then it has a way of stimulating economic growth. If that money is circulating and circulating within the market, whichever the way it is accessed, it has a way, economically it has been shown, as long as that money is being utilized or it's not in store, it has a way of stimulating the economy. And of course, that is the purpose of money. And that's why we have a full section or a sector in the public we call the monetary authority to manage this money supply, because it has one of the main functions being to manage the growth of the economy. Now, if that be the case, then we have two sides of the monetary authority. We have that of domestic currency and that of foreign currency. Now we realize that for external debt, if you look at it in the year 2013, it was standing at 843,562 Kenya shillings. That is a billion, 843 billion to be precise. But by the end of last year, that is 2020, it was standing at 3.5, that is 3 trillion, 3.5 trillion. Now, if you look at domestic debt, the growth rate, as much as it has grown, is not as much of that of external debt. And if you can, then you would say that before 2013, the public debt was still high, but heavily denominated in domestic currency. But that one seems to be have interchanged, and no wonder now the concern and the question of sustainability. So therefore, the external debt started at 53% by June last year. Currently, I think it has moved up to above 66%. That is, in terms of composition, the foreign debt has overtaken that of domestic debt. If you look at again, we focus more on the foreign debt, and we give attention at what composes this foreign debt. You see that over the years, there has been kind of a trend that is of multilateral debt. We have bilateral debt, which these two is what mainly we call concessional loans. We also have commercial debts or non-concessional loans, which mainly we term them as expensive loans. Now, if you look at the multilateral debt, it has been growing, but if you compare with that of commercial debt, whereby in the year 2012, which we were using as the base year, you find that commercial loans was just starting at around 50 billion. But by last year, that loan has actually come to about 1.1 trillion. That's the commercial debt. And this actually has not captured that of the recent acquisition of commercial loans through Eurobond. So you can tell that, of course, it has surpassed the figure shown here. But the growth rate, that of commercial loans, I mean non-commercial loans, then you'd say that they are a bit low in terms of their growth. Now, and of course, the reason you may want to ask, and why the government then is shifting from these concessional loans to non-concessional loans. Of course, for commercial loans, they always look at the debt rating of a country, while the ones for multilateral and bilateral, they are quite concerned about the micro and macroeconomic conditions of an economy before a loan is given. And that's why you find that before a loan is given, which is concessional, then it has to be, or it is attached to a number of conditions, because one, they are meant to stimulate an economy. They are meant to save an economy from crisis. But commercial loans mainly are guided by the interest to make more profit. And as long as the government can pay, then they are no much concern about any any other condition. The other thing probably they look at is the return on those loans. And you find that the interest payable on these commercial loans versus the non-commercial loans, it's quite high. And that's why the commercial loaners are not much in much care about the macroeconomic conditions, but they focus also on the return on the loans, which is gauged by the interest rates. Therefore, this table, or the table here, try to compare the commercial versus non-commercial loans, and also look at the case of the economic growth or the size of the economy. And I would want to look at the real GDP and also compare it with the debt, because we have two forms of measure when it comes to GDP. We have what we call the nominal GDP. The nominal GDP, that GDP that you have ignored the effect in a GDP that is positive, but it is not in essence that the economy grew, but the prices within the economy increased. You can have a situation when the nominal GDP is positive in terms of growth, while what we call the real one, now you've eliminated the effect of price. And you find that the real GDP now is a negative. The growth is negative. So the nominal GDP can be driven, the growth of it can be driven by changes, by increase in prices within the economy, or what we may call the inflation. Now, initially, what we used to have before we did the rebasing is that we used to have what we were calling a base year. And the prices would be kind of stack or are based on a particular constant price. If we would call it a constant price, like before rebasing, we were using 2000 pricing. That is to say, from that point, there were no change in prices, and therefore the GDP would be what we call the real GDP. Then also, when you look at the public debt, there is the nominal public debt and the real public debt. So you find that once public debt is acquired, and the public debt, we have public debt and public deficit. Those are two different things. So public deficit is that difference between revenue and the public expenditure at any given financial year. Well, once we talk about public debt, is accumulated over time. So a particular year debt is a public deficit. So once it is accumulated over time and you ignore the interest payable, then we call that one the real public debt. If you ignore the debt, the interest payable. So what we have here is what we may call the real public debt, because it has not captured the interest payable. And you can see that the amount in terms of interest payable per financial year is quite huge. And by therefore comparing the real GDP and the real public debt, you'll find that as at last year, 2020, then the public debt is 144.2% of the real GDP. So this is a situation that put more of a factual position in terms of what our country is of its public debt in relation to that of size of the GDP. So that's a position that need to come out clear. And we were saying that, of course, based on the analysis, then real figures, if we talk about then nominal GDP, then you have to add on top of the public debt, the interest payable. And you'll find that the ratios will not be much different. Now, in order to pay public debt, a country requires to have resources that is coming from out. And this, once I'm talking about public debt, please allow me here just to concentrate on foreign debt, because as I stated, we may not have much of an issue once it comes to domestic debt. So here we concentrate more on foreign debt because it is one of the main reason why countries acquire financial crisis. That's why most of countries we've seen, and we have also reviewed in the document, have faced the financial crisis. So here, the only way that any economy can pay a foreign debt is by acquiring that country, the country it has in terms of debt responsibility. It has to acquire resources from that country. Now, but it's also possible, like for example, if Kenya shillings was convertible, like that one of US dollar, it can then be used to pay foreign debt. Yes. So in that case, therefore, for Kenya to pay its public debt, that is foreign denominated, foreign currency denominated, then it must export more. Two, it needs to attract foreign investment, what we call FDI. It has to have what we call the issue of payment, or maybe the locals who are living in other countries be in a position to do more of transfer, or simply just acquire more debt. Now, from the table we have here, we have what we are calling foreign reserve. This is the total reserve that the central bank is holding each year. And this is cumulative. And you find that as per financial year ending last year, the reserve was standing at 885 billion. This is the amount then that, one, it is used to pay for imports. Two, it is used to pay for debt, and also for all services that are foreign required. So in this case, this is the total amount that is required. But now we look at also the terms of debt alone, leave alone importation, and you'll find that the external debt, in terms of accumulation, it has been far increasing compared to that of foreign reserves. So then that difference definitely will constitute what we may call a deficit, a balance of payment deficit. And this is what we have then, that on top of the fact that we need to pay for foreign kind of commitment, we also have the imports and export difference occurring, and it is increasing over time. The foreign debt can also result from the fact that the imports are more than the exports. So therefore, we have a deficit in terms of balance of payment expanding over time, and this deficit require continuously to be financed through borrowing. So public debt, and of course, the concept of import, we find that Kenya has, of course, pressure coming from a very unique concept that I would want to consider here. And I want to say that here, I want to look at the public debt done in the document by looking at the monetary policy. How has the monetary policy impacted on the growth of this public debt, which is denominated in foreign currency? So, and I want to look at it mainly by the focus on import and how it has monetary policy has promoted import and discouraged export in Kenya. So we find that, of course, the exchange rate in terms of Kenya shillings per dollar, that's the major measure of exchange rate, but also we can use other currency, but it doesn't move far from that one of Kenya shillings per unit of dollar. So we find that Kenya shillings has been in a constant kind of pressure against dollar over time. And what happens is that we have monetary policy always responding to this. Anytime Kenya has an issue in terms of exchange rate, then we have seen monetary authority quickly responding and, of course, arresting the situation. But the question that we were asking, is this a good thing or has it impacted negatively and therefore resulted to accumulation of public debt that is foreign denominated? Of course, in order to pay foreign public debt, as I've already noted, Kenya needs to acquire foreign resources, that is foreign currency. And this can only be through export of goods and services. It can also receive remittance, all by use of foreign direct investment. But again, foreign direct investment has also another issue because it has been seen is a short-term kind of gain, while in the long run, it may actually work against. It may work against an economy by the fact that the investors need to be setting, or they have to set the income or any interest accrued to their investment out of the economy. So again, in the long run, there has been a question in terms of comparing a domestic investor and a foreign investor, but that was not a focus here. But the main reason, the main ways that an economy, Kenya, will acquire foreign currency will be through export of goods and services. It will also get that from a remittance and foreign direct investment. The moment the total receipt from the three is more, I mean, it's actually less than the demand for foreign commitment, then it will be bridged, or it's bridged by borrowing. The only thing, and it has to be clear, is that we always have our big brothers very ready to assist in order not to discourage imports. That has been an issue, and we've been seeing that happening, that any economy that's probably is important in terms of consumption will lack the support of other major countries when it comes to a balance of payment deficit. So in order the commitment to continue, and therefore you're able to service foreign requirements, there has to be domestic production of goods and services, one for purposes of domestic consumption and also for export. So if domestic production is not enough for domestic consumption, then the gap will be filled by imports. Now, the second thing in this is that the moment domestic production is expensive than the foreign production, then the market has it that consumer will always go for the cheap things, or the one that are lower in terms of pricing. So if domestic products are more expensive than foreign produced goods, then you'll find that there will be more of import. And a good example is what is happening currently, that once it comes to the production of eggs in economy, it has been found to be a bit expensive compared to that one coming from Uganda. And we have seen a number of imports of eggs coming from Uganda. Now, this study is asking this question: could it be possible that the management of exchange rate is giving a subsidy to foreign products, and therefore the foreign products are seen to be cheaper compared to that of domestic production? It's also asking the question that could it be that exchange rate has been maintained so uncompetitive and to the disadvantage of Kenya, such that the domestic produce are unable to compete with foreign produce? And I want to state clearly here that the study has actually answered that positively. Now, to bring that one more clearer, I want to put that competitiveness of domestic product and that of foreign product is encouraged in order to make the goods that are domestically produced be equal in terms of pricing with that of foreign produce, something that we usually call the purchasing power parity, maintaining purchasing power parity. Now, if the domestic produce are found to be expensive than that of foreign market due to demand of foreign goods by use of foreign currency, then the exchange rate reacts. The exchange rate reacts such that in the long run, then the purchasing power parity is then restored. What that happens is that it makes domestic produce always, in a way, competitive to others. And I would say here, it's better to have inflation for domestic goods that are priced domestically or by use of domestic price than to have cheap foreign goods, which in terms of welfare, it could be good, but in the long run, you find that the economy is offshedding its income to foreign countries. And that's what has been happening in Kenya. By maintaining a strong exchange rate, or by maintaining a strong currency, it has actually been seen that it has made the domestic produced good and competitive. So to solve that or to deal with that, then monetary policy is a good tool that can be used. So the data that we have, and it's already given in the document, has been seen that, of course, Kenya has been losing its share of market to other African countries. So as Kenya is reducing its exports, you find that other countries related in terms of size, related in terms of macroeconomic conditions, they have been gaining. Now, again, is that Kenya has increasingly continued to import goods that even are coming from a former importer of Kenya's product. The same product that Kenya was importing, was exporting to some countries, it has been, of course, discovered or shown that it is now importing from the same countries. And the answer to that, or the reason to that, is that Kenya has production has become uncompetitive and has come through due to strong domestic currency. And for that reason, then we have been seeing a situation where the balance of payment deficit has been widening. And that deficit, then it is mainly financed by use of inflow of capital that is borrowed. So therefore, the story I have is that, of course, Kenya shillings has remained strong. It has clearly been shown that the monetary authority, that is the central bank, keeps on engaging in foreign exchange market by defending the domestic currency from depreciation. And this, I must say that it has more often, a number of times, been indicated by IMF that Kenya shillings is highly overvalued. It's highly overvalued. And the only reason why the monetary authority would want to defend that high valued currency, there are two main reasons. One of it is to make sure that the debt, the foreign debt, of course, does not appreciate by depreciation of domestic currency. And the second thing, of course, maintaining the pricing domestically low, of course, mechanically, by the fact that those goods that are coming from out will appear cheap, but in actual sense, they have been subsidized. Of course, this makes exchange rate a heavily managed exchange rate domestically. And this one just fails to promote competitiveness. And by so doing, then you find that the economic growth then is dampened. So again, and another problem is that you find that maintaining or management of this exchange rate, this fixed, of course, I must admit that Central Bank of Kenya does not admit that the exchange rate is fixed. But then we would call it heavily managed exchange rate. And for it to be to continue being managed, then we require to maintain foreign reserves. Foreign reserves is required to be maintained all through in order to manage this fixed exchange rate. So the total reserves by end of last financial year, no, sorry, last but one, you note that we've not managed to get the 2021 economic survey. So a number of data is still missing. So we are working up to 2020 June, that is 2019, 2020 financial year. So the reserve at that particular time stood at 8.4% of GDP. This is about 4.6 months of worth of imports. These are even a requirement that has been seen that the IMF require that the country maintain this kind of foreign reserves. But I want to note that, of course, as much as this foreign reserve is an important thing for purposes of guaranteeing a management of domestic currency or exchange rate, and also ensuring imports are paid, it amounts to holding idle resources in an economy all through, because this amount that is constant, and therefore it will have to be that a given amount, I think currently stand around 7 billion US dollars, and therefore that amount need to be maintained in order to manage and pay for imports. I'm calling it idle resources because we have seen some other economies, including China, that made their currency fraud, and therefore the exchange rate always are responding to market forces, that of demand and supply. And by so doing, you find that they were able to reverse the balance of payment from that of negative to that of surplus, to an extent that they now look for resources even to donate to other economies, just by simple management of exchange rate and avoiding holding of these idle resources. But of course,
Dr.
I must.
Jaramba,
Yes, please.
Sorry to interject. I'll request that please you take no more than another 15 minutes.
Okay. So
15, 20 minutes.
Noted.
Thank you.
So now in that case, the question of exports and imports come in by the fact that exchange rate can be used to manage that. Again, is that by a heavy management of exchange rate, then we say that it have an effect of interest rate. You find that domestic current interest rate then will remain above the market or what the market would rather have because of foreign kind of competition. So of course, this is the story I've been trying to bring forward in terms of the use of flexible exchange rate or fixed exchange rate in management of domestic production, and that is done by use of monetary policy. Just to demonstrate the Kenya situation in terms of its monetary policy use, I have the variables shown here. Now, we have the money supply, of course, that is measured by what the public is holding, which normally we call M1. And we have what we are calling its growth. We have the growth of money supply. And here I'm only looking at it in terms of what the public is holding or is able to make a quick decision in terms of its consumption. Now we have what we call the economic growth, mainly the exchange, the money supply is used to manage the growth of an economy, but you find that it can also be used or you remove it from management of economic growth to management of exchange rate. Now I want to put here that from the analysis is that the money supply mainly is clear that it's managing the exchange rate. This is just a demonstration of the same. And by so doing, then you'll find that we have had a stable exchange rate in terms of it's a real, what we call the real exchange rate. It has been quite stable over the years. Again, we also have that the trade balance has just remained poor over the year. That is in deficit. So therefore, this is the clear indication that by the amount of money supply in the circulation, it just is able to maintain the concept of constant exchange rate or the real exchange rate. So now, with that, allow me to look at the side of the public expenditure and how also it probably has contributed to the case of public debt. Now, I want to put that Kenya fiscal policy stance has been that of pro-cyclical. That is to say, it more work against what is supposed to. That is to say that from more of practical scenario, once the economy is growing and therefore more private sector participation, we should be finding the government using that particular time to pay its debt by reducing its expenditure and more so service its debt. Well, once the economy is underperforming or poorly performing, that's then the economy, the public sector is allowed or theoretically has that leeway to acquire debt in order to stimulate. But the pro-cyclical behavior of the Kenya fiscal policy it works opposite. So of course, as a result, expansionary fiscal policy has put Kenya into now the situation of the public debt, the need for public debts. The revenue versus the expenditure, of course, the revenue has been declining. This is a clear show that the revenue is not performing, and the revenue is not performing because the economy is not performing. That is shown here by the data on the screen. Now, if you look at the red highlighted, that just indicates the only positive figures that we've been seeing in terms of increment. So you find that the non-tax revenue, that's mainly from borrowing, has been on a positive trajectory. We have the government expenditure, and we have the public gross nominal debt. So we have the three things, the only area that we have positive posting in Kenya over the years. Now, if you look at the GDP, and of course, some of its main contributors, that is agriculture and the industry, they've not been that well performing. And remember that the fiscal policy, or the growth in terms of expenditure by public sector, is supposed to stimulate the GDP, and of course, bring forth the enablers in the two sectors, that is agriculture and industrial production. But that seems not to be really the case in Kenya. So, of course, the terms of the public sector growth, it has moved from just 2014 financial year to now over 3 trillion. Of course, this has represented about 131% growth, or 19% annual growth, against the average growth of around 5.5, and also that is 5.5% growth in inflation and 5% growth in economic. That is average. If I that this combined, then we have a figure in public sector growth far above any driver that is actually known to cause the public sector to increase. So then, therefore, we are saying this growth is not clear what is pushing it. On the components of public sector expenditure, we have the recurrent expenditure growing by around 20% annually, but we have the development expenditure growing at around 8.3%. And that's quite a mismatch. That means, therefore, that the public sector is growing because of a recurrent expenditure, not development expenditure. And that removes that aspect of it is borrowing, or the expenditure is growing because of investment. This is the same projected in the analysis. Allow me to just say that this is what I've just presented, that we have the recurrent expenditure, development expenditure mismatch, and therefore you find that the ordinary revenue are not able to cover not only development expenditure, but also part of the recurrent expenditure, and therefore borrowing is required. So the this trajectory of recurrent expenditure is quite unsustainable. It is not sustainable because these are constant increase in investment, or not investment, but in expenditure that do not bring forth any income. So therefore, this has not assisted the concept of the expenditure has not assisted and has not conformed to the law by the fact that the recurrent expenditure is more than 80%, and the law requires that, of course, 30% of the public expenditure needs to go to development. Then that being the case, what are the way forward? So some of the suggested area is that fiscal saving need to be identified by rationalization and of course by that is rationalization of public expenditure. That includes review and postponement of low priority development projects. This has been identified under the fiscal consolidation and the projects that need to be rationalized, of course, identified. So cancellations of about that of the dormant project would deliver enough saving by public sector. So a primary surplus of 1.5% of total revenue, if achieved, would deliver sustainable reduction in public debt. So there is another observation that came out that there are some areas of public expenditure, more so on allowances. And this, you find that over the years, the 7 years, that is 2014 to 2019, that about 5 years, the allowances have grown from 127 billion to 173 billion. So a clear review of this need to be done. So, and therefore the suggestion that they should be targeted to the only necessary allowances and avoid a number of overlaps that have already been cited, especially by Salary and Remuneration Commission. So the state corporation and semi-autonomous government agencies need to account for quite a number of allowances. So audit findings from the Office of Auditor General, of course, over this also need to be brought into focus and get interrogated. Total travel-related expenditure, again, would help the public sector to save around 30 billion. Again, in terms of procurement, that one was noted to be one of the area where causing a number of waste. So interest payment, of course, this we've said that it's quite huge per financial year, which cost about 23% of the total revenue in terms of expenditure per fiscal budget. So to cap the debt trajectory and aiming for a balanced surplus over the medium-term key, there is need to ensure what we call the efficiency and effectiveness of public spending by tightening this, the expenditure under the big four area. In fact, this one has come clear on some of the projects, especially in the housing, the need to focus on the big four. Public borrowing also arise to due to, of course, from the shortfalls of the revenue. To contain public debts, alignment of public expenditure to revenue is quite important. So the national government has a very large stock of ongoing projects. In fact, this one I want to say that the total number of projects identified to have stalled, they are amounting to about 522 projects. Now, these projects were clearly under medium-term plan 2. That is before, they were initiated before the medium-term plan 2, which is now, they were part of medium-term plan 1, which was I think 2020, that is 5 years before 2013. And that is prior to the current regime. So a clear indication that there was kind of discarding of the previous plan and the project already implemented, and therefore costing the public a good amount, which we are saying they are about 70% are completed, and they require about 900 billion to complete. So the reason why a number of projects here were discontinued need to be further interrogated, and also the requirement for maybe discarding a project that is 70% and the initial plan that they had, what they were meant to achieve. Yeah, it's an area that require further interrogation. So debt management policy that include over-reliance of foreign currency, of course, that one I've indicated that needs to be relooked at. This requirement of debt mix needs to be also interrogated, because the country should be moving away from foreign debt to domestic debt. While external debt may appear to be less expensive than domestic debt, of course, it has, foreign debt has more risk in case that the country is unable to service. It also makes, of course, domestic production, as I've indicated, more unstable and competitive. So monetary authority, therefore, should allow exchange rate adjustment that is almost close or equal to the market clearing or the equilibrium. Whether Kenya need this debt relief, of course, from our analysis, we realized that Kenya asking for a relief, we noted that it was not as much as it required to be given debt relief. This could not proceed, so it was not effected, and that even when it was given, it was only 6 months and attached to the case of Corona, because if that happens and it was extended before that period, then it will initiate a recalling of number of loans, and it would pay now it would actually speed up the financial crisis for the country. So again, Kenya is faced with a quite precarious condition that it may not require or it may not manage to go and request for debt relief. So I think that's the much I have for now. Back to you, Ajiro.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jaramba. And you've taken a very wide subject and tried to condense it, you know, in a relatively short presentation. And thank you for that. Several of the people here would have seen the report and would have looked at it. And I won't try and, you know, repeat all that you shared because it's a lot. Suffice to say that of the recommendations you've made some very, recommendations on the expenditure side, observations and recommendations on the expenditure side, and then also on the monetary side. We'll be looking at the taxation recommendations the coming week. And part of the reason we decided to split the conversation is we felt there's been quite a lot of discussion around taxation. Of course, it has become a very painful point, and we felt that that needs its own day to discuss. What we haven't discussed so much, we've also had some decent coverage of the expenditure side. And I think many of the recommendations of the report align with those of the IMF. Not all, but many of them. On the monetary side, I think that conversation hasn't really you know, received enough attention. And as a coalition, we found that this is an area we would seek some guidance. because some of the recommendations you're making is that we need less management of the exchange rate so that the exchange rate can find its equilibrium. This means devaluing the Kenya shilling, which is another thing that I imagine business and the markets would shudder at, a mention of. Of course, there are also the risks associated with that. But then you make a very competitive, very compelling case, because what you're saying is that this process is going to be painful, and we need to consider the short-term pains which are already being borne through heavy taxation against the long term, which is building up the competitiveness through a more realistic exchange rate and a less managed monetary policy. So is this one of the things that we should be adopting as the Okoa Uchumi coalition, and how does this look? What if we are going to say stop, advocate for this, then what are the scenarios that we are looking at? I think the other thing is the debt ratio, the domestic to external borrowing. There is different schools of thought around this. We've worked with some experts who are telling us domestic debt is really expensive, and we're of the thinking that the domestic debt is the one that's killing business. Of course, this report shows us no. Really, the frustration of business is based on the monetary policy. But even in our conversations with Parliament and parliamentarians, they said Treasury convinced them that they're going to get more multilateral debt so that they can restructure the debt away from domestic towards external. And so there's a lot of confusion around this, and you're giving us a clear way forward in terms of saying, let's go back to the domestic. The multilateral is favorable, but of course, Kenya also has limits on multilateral borrowing, especially under the particular baskets, because we rebase the economy. And that has implications for where we can borrow. There are some facilities we are no longer eligible for. Then the last big thing on the monetary side is what you're calling the real economy versus the nominal, and this use of data. And this is maybe what we were calling the voodoo economics, where we are saying the government is talking about, and this voodoo, how can we be growing, but there are no jobs? And I think you're pointing here towards some of the disconnects are possibly around the use of data, the use of the real data and measuring the real economy versus the nominal economy. And government has been talking about rebasing the economy. In fact, they may have rebased it yet again using this nominal data. And the nominal data then shows that Kenyans can, the economy can generate more revenue than they that's also an indicator that I need to stop and allow the our discussants to help us flesh out some of these pertinent questions, especially maybe the difficult questions that require strong leadership around this monetary policy. And I'd like to start by inviting Dr. Simon Githuku, who's responsible for fiscal Policy and Research at the Kenya Association of Manufacturers, CAM, to take some 10 minutes or so to talk us through his reflections on the points that Dr. Jaramba has raised. So, Dr. Geduku, please take the floor.
Thank you, Wajiro, for this opportunity. And I'm glad to be part of this opportunity on behalf of CAM CEO, Phyllis Wakega. And thank you, Dr. Jaraba, for the good presentation and the paper that you have generated. Public debt matters to the private sector because we know the only sustainable means to retire that debt is through domestic tax mobilization. And therefore, when we have rising debt stock, it alarms the private sector because the private sector would anticipate that the tax burden will increase. And we know that the tax burden is already heavy on formal businesses, particularly the manufacturing industry, which the Treasury estimate contributes about 17.5% of taxes, 17.5 taxes, yet contributes about 7.5% of GDP, whereas the agriculture, which comprises about that 5% of GDP, only contribute 2.3%. So all these economic sectors needs to shoulder their rightful burden of this taxation issue. And that taxation is a major frustration for businesses, particularly the manufacturing sector, and is one of CAM advocacy agenda, particularly the frequent changes to the tax regime that happens, particularly through the Finance Act. It creates a lot of uncertainty, and we know that the manufacturing industry has long maturation period requiring sustainable, predictable tax environment. And that's why we welcome government proposal that the Treasury is spearheading the development of national tax policy, which we are hopeful it will address this problem. We know that Kenyan public debt, we know Dr. Jarab has highlighted the risks that are there. And the primary cause has been the persistent fiscal deficit, the commercial debts that the government has procured, which we know they have high interest costs, and also the grace period for repayment is shorter. However, we know that the government is insisting that the public debt is sustainable. But we know that there are signs that the government is struggling to meet its debt obligation. And that's why it has sought the help of the IMF. We also know of the delays the government has had in terms of disbursement of shareable revenue to the counties, impacting negatively on service delivery of counties. And we know that the counties play two functions which are critical for sustainable development of the country. And that one of them is the health sector, which is critical, including in the containment of the pandemic, which has also implication on the businesses, because the pandemic will determine how quickly the economy recovers. The other one is agriculture, and we know that there is huge potential in the agro-based value chain. The other issue is the pending bills. That is a problem, and CAM has been advocating for the payment of these pending bills to increase liquidity of the private sector. But how did we get here that we are concerned about the debt issue? One is oversight role. Parliament, has it effectively discharged that mandate as per the Constitution and the PFM Act 2012? This study needs to tease out what are these issues. And the issue of public PFM management is quite elaborated in the Constitution and the PFM Act, including the creation of these institutions such as SRC, CRI, Office of the Control of Budget, strengthening the function of the Auditor General. We need to tease out where are these institutional problems in terms of oversight of the public funds. And we cannot overlook the importance of the counties. Is the Senate able to oversight properly the functions, including the county assembly? Because that is where, those are the sources of the problems we are seeing. There is also, we would also expect that the executive is responsible enough and therefore is concerned about where the money is going. We know that in the Treasury, we have the debt management department. We have a Director General in charge of that. We also have Public Investment Management Unit, which was recently created. And we know that those two institutions are critical. Can that framework work in our context? Which I can say appears to be like self-oversight of the executive. What lessons can we draw from other jurisdictions, for example, Sweden? The question of the value for money or where the money is going is crucial. We know that there has been a lot of efforts to build the infrastructure and a lot of money put into it. Is there any cost benefit analysis carried out to determine their cost effectiveness and ability to pay? Because if these infrastructure projects do not generate the revenues that were projected, then we will have a problem in terms of repayment of debt. And we know that the infrastructure is an enabler, and that affects how are these infrastructure projects conceptualized. I'll give an example. If you drive along this Waiaki to Rironi, you'll find that on your way to Nakuru, the left-hand side, there are some sections which are in concrete, but the right side is not the same. Government is aware that these infrastructure projects is like they are in transit corridors. The trucks are loaded were going up, but most of them are empty when going down to the port of Mombasa or Lamu port. And that has to be addressed. And that's why the issues of industrialization, the responsibility of counties in terms of stimulating economic activities in their respective counties matter. I know you have made a good attempt to analyze the PFM or Public Financial Management Framework. And I will let you know that there is a tool called PEFA, Public Expenditure and Financial Accountability, which is an excellent tool. I participated in development of counties, and those, if you search the PEFA Secretariat website, they are there. And they analyze the entire PFMC And the same was carried out for the national government, and the report is available. So what should ideally happen is that when these reports are generated and published, there should be an action plan on how to enhance the PFM systems of the two governments. I don't think that is happening. So it will be good that you go to this, review these reports, particularly what they recommend and their findings. And what we should create, in my view, a 5-year plan to improve, to strengthen the PFM system, create a roadmap to improve accountability and transparency. And this will help this country to ensure that the public gets the value for money in terms of expenditure of PFM. It will do all these issues you have alluded to, including fiscal indiscipline, oversight, responsibilities of different institutions, and such. The next point is that growth of export. I think you have highlighted the importance. And I know we have had quite a number of policies, including institution, EPZs, special economic zones, and other policy instruments. We are also of the view that discussion about the much derided import substitution policy is worth considering, given the experience we have had with the pandemic, that we cannot rely on entirely on the global value chains, because they are very vulnerable to the risks, particularly supply chain disruptions. There are possibilities, particularly through the agro-based value chains, component manufacturing, to reverse this trend of minimizing exposure to the domestic economy. The other important point I want to talk about is the role of taxes, tax revenue. And we hold that this is an open secret. The government has to allow the private sector activity to flourish. If you plot some of the consumption-based taxes, so for example, VAT, during this period we have had the pandemic, you will note that we have had, when the lockdowns were imposed, you find that sharp decline in VAT revenue collection. What that tells you that if the private sector is able to flourish, government will collect more taxes. When I look at the structural reforms that have been mentioned as proposed by the IMF, they have direct impact on businesses. And we know the recommendations of doing away with the tax exemption, zero rating of products, for example, on VAT. And we know that increased taxation has an implication on the cost of doing business and cost of doing business, and therefore profitability. And that puts at risk the need for capital accumulation, which is in short supply in developing countries such as ours. I'll give two examples of the impact of this. For example,
sorry, Dr. Geduku,
yes,
you maybe take another 2 minutes to conclude your remarks. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I think I'll take two. I may skip those examples. The importance of devaluation of currency, I will say that it can work for those countries which have large tradable industrial sector. But for Kenya, we have to do a delicate balancing act because we are net importing country. And that appreciation of the shilling or the weakening We have attributed that to, we estimate it has increased the cost of imported raw materials for processing by about 4%. I'll conclude by saying that the debt problem is a symptom of an underlying problem. And therefore, diagnosis, as you are carrying out in this study, is important so that the different types of medicines can be prescribed to treat the ailment. And I will imagine this ailment, they to need the Panadol for there is fever, stomach, or headache or such, which means that a one-size-fits-all solution will not work. So what do I think can be the remedy? We need to institute an economic recovery plan, which should be designed as a stimulus program or an integrated program to deal with all those institutional problems, export issue, business or environment problem, and many others that should be determined and implemented in a 5-year period. This is important to put the Kenyan economy on a sustainable growth and development path. And the size of a stimulus matter based on the American economy. Last point is to give an example of the economic recovery strategy for wealth and employment creation, which was implemented during 2003 to 2007 period. The GDP registered a growth of 7% in 2007. And the manufacturing sector contribution to GDP was the highest actually in the entire since independence, at 12.8%. So that is my thinking of what can be done to address this debt and other issues that the economy is facing. So given the limited time, I'll stop there. Thank you, and back to you, Wajir.
Thank you, Dr. Geduku, for your very useful, insightful remarks and questions. And yes, apologies for the time. And even as you were speaking, it occurred to me that we would have done well to just focus on one aspect of the fiscal consolidation or the debt recovery process. Like I said, we'll deal with tax next week, same time, same place. If you see the invite, there's a link for that. So please let's keep the taxation conversations for then. Right now, we are very keen to hear feedback in terms of the macroeconomic decisions or things we need to consider, and you've given us some very good ones. You've told us that we need to look at the import substitution policy. You've told us that we need to be very careful with the devaluation. You did not say whether it is necessary and it should be done or not. Do we keep the Kenya shilling, maintain the Kenya shilling and at its value? Then you've also talked about the need for an economic stimulus, and you've drawn the comparison with the strategy developed in 2003, drawn parallels there. I think now you're beginning to take us forward and prompting some of the thorny areas. It gives us a good basis for our discussion. You've also made a lot of inputs into expenditure accountability, the public investment management, which we may not have time. I'm looking at our time and seeing we may not have time to discuss exhaustively. I see that on the expenditure transparency side, there's a lot of concurrence in what you're saying, in what Dr. Jaramba has shared with what the IMF has proposed. Maybe if we have a separate session on the privatization, the restructuring of state corporations, it may allow us to be more detailed. So I'm seeing that some of maybe the differences between what the IMF has proposed, IMF and Kenya government have put in the fiscal consolidation program, and our findings are around the macroeconomic remedies, and some are not even differences. Maybe it's we agree on the analysis, but then in the implementation, some of those issues have not been included. So maybe we focus a lot more on those ones, so that we can come out of here with something very concrete in terms of the feedback that we'll give Dr. Jaramba in this session. With that, I'd like to invite Kwame to kindly give us his feedback and remarks and assist us in really saying, should we be picking up these very pointed recommendations on the macroeconomic policy of the country, on as addressed by Dr. Jaramba. Kwame, please. I hope he's still on. He had indicated he had another meeting. Oh, wonderful. Kwame, over to you.
Thanks a lot, and thanks to Dr. Jaramba for laying out these questions and of course, a diagnosis of how we got here. So because I have 10 minutes, I'll make 4 points. So I think the first is my quibble. I actually think it's very dangerous for economists to tell government that one form of borrowing is better than the other. Reading this paper and actually having listened, perhaps that's not what Dr. Jaramba was saying, but one would get the impression that it says, look, you can actually substitute foreign borrowing for domestic borrowing and everything would be okay. I mean, I'm trivializing it perhaps. I don't think so. Part of the reason being that the way economists look, or the way as a student of economics I look at public debt, is I look at the opportunity costs and the trade-offs that you make by deciding either to go for domestic debt or foreign debt. And each of them has advantages and the other and costs. And there are things that you trade off, or the opportunity cost to each of those positions. So for external debt, I think you mentioned it very, very clearly that one of the things that does is you actually import exchange control risks. I mean, exchange risks in the sense that, of course, if the currency depreciates, then obviously the nominal value of how much you have to pay goes up. And that can actually tip currencies, can tip some countries into problems of debt crisis if the debt was already unmanageable to begin with. Domestic debt also has, and my view that is in Kenya today, you're actually seeing some of the effects. So for instance, this year, 900 billion shillings is 1 trillion shillings is being paid out in terms of debt, right? 1 trillion shillings, 1 trillion, almost 1.1 trillion is being paid out in the next financial year, or the financial year that we've started from July or 1st. But of that 1.1 trillion, close to 700 billion is actually government of Kenya redeeming domestic debt and paying both domestic debt and the principal, and obviously the redemption, the interest and the redemption of the principal. So most of these debt, regardless of the share, where the basket of debt, of course, is now going towards the external debt, the exchange rate risk, I think, is one that we have to be very, very careful about, and I'll be coming to it as a second point. So the first point I wanted us to say is, perhaps, I think the language in the document needs to be fairer to say that there are risks on both sides. Because I think that somebody could perhaps naively read it as saying that there's no risk to domestic debt. One other thing that comes with domestic debt, obviously, is this displacement of domestic borrowing. So banks obviously have record liquidity levels, but no one has been borrowing, partly because government mostly sweeps most of it. And many banks have very little, on comparative terms, incentive to actually lend to small and micro enterprises, or in enterprises in general. So the effect of government borrowing a lot domestically has significant effects for the growth and actually the type of private sector that you have. And I think it's affected this. There's some literature to that extent as well out there. The second one is, it's also true that one of the reasons why governments might prefer domestic borrowing is that you can actually just deflate the debt. I mean, you print money, you create inflation, and then you actually reduce the debt payment in terms of the real quantity of that debt by deflating. And inflation is actually some form of hidden taxation. So the citizen, from a citizen's perspective, I'd be very cautious to make it look like that is all debt, requires prudence, and actually that discussion between the domestic and the foreign, I think needs some circumspection. So that's the first. The second point is basically, I agree with Dr. Njaramba, which is on the question of monetary policy, because we are discussing monetary policy. I think you don't have to be told by anyone else, but if you look at it, it is very clear to me that Kenya's exchange, that there's something happening at the central bank or somewhere in the markets that keeping Kenya's exchange rate far too strong. And I don't say that because it's appeared fast in a document that the IMF cited in 2018, when there was that big discussion between the IMF and the central bank, and the governor came out and said that, look, the methods that were being used were actually not what was the preference of Kenya's monetary policy authorities. But even if you leave that, just looking at it as a citizen, if you look at the last 10 years, maybe 5, all our neighbors, all the neighboring countries have had depreciations in their currencies going to maybe 11, 14, sometimes as much as closer to 20 relative to Kenya. And as Kenya's exchange or economy gotten stronger, or something happened that should allow that to happen? I don't think so. So it's very, very clear. And that might also have something to say for the fact that, and I'm one person who actually believes as well that my macroeconomics thinking is, we also have to be careful telling people that imports are bad and exports are good. Imports and exports have value. Obviously, a balance is essential. But usually, if you have the currency depreciating to actually correct for that, that usually is a question. So the monetary policy thing suggests to me that the exchange rate is strong. I think that there's been coverage in the press and some of the continental press, business press, suggesting that many bankers may not say it, or people in the financial markets don't say it, but they have the thinking that the domestic currency is far too strong and being supported by the treasury. Sorry, not by the treasury, by the monetary policy authorities, by which they're talking about the central bank. Now, I come to the third point, which is, I also think that Dr. Njaramba is correct by saying that, look, keeping a strong currency as an end in itself, or for whatever reasons, is not cost-free. Again, that cost falls back on the citizen and falls back on working people. So the cost of holding reserves has a very, very serious opportunity cost. One of those being, quite apart from the fact that it's a waste of resources. Dr. Njaramba said keeping resources outside use, which I agree with. It also has certain signals that it sends to the markets. And if you're going to be honest, I can tell you that there are people who have been holding dollars, whether in banks or financial services countries and everything else, who will tell you that they know that in the next 3-4 years, Kenya's currency, especially if you look at the fact that there's borrowing externally, is going to degrade regardless of what Kenya does. Why? Because they think that the speculators think that the government of Kenya will run out of cash, or let's say the central bank will run out of cash. And when it runs out of dollars, it will not be able to support the domestic currency as much as it has done, and there's going to be a sharp reduction. That's one. 2, historically, Kenya's currency tends to be very, very strong. And then when it crashes, quote unquote, I use the word crash advisedly, when it comes down, it tends to depreciate by huge amounts, such as 20% at a go. Happened in 94, happened some time back before President Kibaki left. Of course, there was some propping up and back and there. So the behavior of the Kenya shilling suggests to many people that actually allowing it to adjust, because the foreign exchange is actually supposed to be an anchor that allows us to adjust for imports versus exports, would be useful, and it would actually also help foreign Kenya's exports because they would become quote unquote more affordable or cheaper in comparative terms. So that suggests that the idea of keeping a strong currency as an end in itself is not a good one. I have also seen other countries that do this. Somebody was suggesting to the government of India, which has 700 billion, close to 700 billion in reserves, that look, you're wasting money. But more importantly, what you're doing is you're just priming speculators, because they know that you'll always do this mopping up by basically trying to keep dollars as an end in itself. So what they do is they also prepare for the other side, and actually keeping a strong currency in itself, because of what the theory that economists call the impossibility trilemma, impossibility theorem by Robert Mandel, suggests that if you decide that the currency is what you're defending, you lose flexibility in many other things in terms of policy sovereignty and other other decisions that you might have to make regarding monetary policy. So if defending the currency by all means is what has been chosen, I think the cost for it, in the circumstances that we exist in, are actually too high. And I agree with that. Finally, so some of this is partly the decision. Because we were talking about fiscal consolidation today, my view again is that fiscal consolidation, even if we did not bring in the IMF, whatever people want to say, fiscal consolidation would have to happen. Because absent that, what happens is a crash. And what a crash does is a hard landing, like happened with many other countries in this continent and other parts. So it's not a new thing, to be honest. This is a mathematical problem. If your deficit is growing faster than revenues are growing, that's one. Two, if the interest rates, the total interest rates is growing faster than GDP is growing, then regardless of what you do, whether it's domestic debt or external debt, regardless of what you do, it means that the debt to GDP ratio, both in nominal and real terms, will grow. So fiscal consolidation is something that I wish as Kenyans would approach as this is a discussion we need to have, as opposed to bringing in IMF and World Bank and everything else. I mean, those are sideshows, to be honest. So hard decisions are going to be made. And Dr. Jaramba has told us, I'm concluding here, Dr. Jaramba has told us that growth in public spending has been happening, and the recurrent expenditure trajectory is what has been driving it. Most of it has actually been recurrent. Why? Allowances and salaries. So the government of Kenya, regardless of what investments has made, has been paying salaries, and that has been driving part of the deficit. So fiscal consolidation means you have to bring down that deficit to a level that is quite better. I mean, much better than it is now, but more importantly, to make sure that you're generating resources to be able to do that. I think part of this also came from the fact that in 2014, there was a rebasing of the economy. Rebasing of the economy is actually considered good behavior because it's recommended every 5 years. So Kenya hasn't done one in a bit. The only thing that I fear is when you have a rebasing of the economy, it makes it look like the economy is larger, but as a share of collected revenues to GDP, what it did in Kenya's case was actually shaved off, I think, about 2 or 3% of GDP points. So if you continue to spend without the realization that, fine, the rebasing brought in other parts of what we call the informal sector. I wish we'd have better words, but basically bringing other working people in the economy, but do not adjust for the kind of economy that you have, for the fact that many more people work in the informal sector and the way they pay taxes are more indirect and other things, then obviously we are left with a position in which we continue to spend and drive deficits. But that revenue, covering it would be extremely difficult. So I think what this brings us to is, it's clear to me, in my view, that some of the things that are being done, a freeze in wages is obviously required. Whether the IMF calls for it or not, a freeze in wages is necessary. Otherwise, there's going to be a hard landing. That's one. Two, there's a suspension that is necessary for some of the big projects that are being undertaken. But more importantly, let me conclude with one thing. As a student of economics, one of the things that I and my colleagues did, and maybe we could share that paper once it's done with everybody here, is I am very, very reluctant to accept the Keynesian theory, or rather the belief that government spending always is, I mean, what did we say? Using language such as enablers. Because one of the things about government spending in Kenya, I mean, World Bank surveys have done it. We actually did it this year, and we found out that government spending in Kenya, for some sectors, globally, when you spend on health, the multiplier in terms of GDP gains are actually much higher. In the part of Kenya's government is specifically on health and other sectors, it's a negative. So it's telling you that the machinery of public spending in Kenya is so inefficient, and that's a structural problem. So whether you then call it structural adjustment because the IMF calls it or not, it's telling you the structure of public spending in Kenya, where you're taking 15, 16% of GDP, pushing it through a system in which most of it leaks, is a problem. And it needs to be fixed regardless. So that's what I hope fiscal consolidation gets us. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Kwame. And you've really provoked and responded to some of the issues and, you know, opened up further areas of conversation. I'd like to give Dr. Jaramba a few minutes to respond to those two presentations, and then we'll open up to take a few questions that we can then pose to Dr. Jaramba, and as well as Kwame and Dr. Geduku as they come in. So Dr. Jaramba, some 10 minutes or so. I know it's not a fair ask, but time is not on our side. Thank you.
I'll try to keep to that time, but very good areas that are coming up. And I would want to thank Dr. Geduku and Owino. These are people I think have been following some of their work. Thank you so much for this contribution. Now, would want to go to Owino's issue, the last issues, and probably bring to focus some of the area maybe he's actually mentioned. I would want to put Kenya as a patient who is suffering from cancer. And then let's hope that, of course, the consolidation, the fiscal consolidation as highlighted. Remember, this one was highlighted by the government. This is not IMF requirement. The government came up with some measures on how to deal with economic issues that are already there and went to IMF for assistance. So this is the work of the government. And of course, it brings a major question whether what was the motive? Is it actually to consolidate or actually just to access the money, as I started by saying. Now, being a patient Kenya, then it has to be treated. And to be treated the cancer, you can decide to deal with the painkillers, or just have the operation done. The cancer cancerous part is removed and the patient is healed, but left to heal the wound. So some of the issues I'm actually getting, and they are putting us into fear, I tend to think is a wound that need to be healed after the operation has been done. I want to put clearly that in my understanding, once you talk about domestic borrowing by the public sector, you are actually also putting in a caveat attached to it that then the government does not need to spend on foreign product, that is goods and services. And assuming the government therefore borrow domestically, that would mean it would have to spend domestically. And I want to give an example of this case of SGR. SGR, the total amount that was used was brought into Kenya, not as financial assistance. We do talk about project support. It was actually A&A, appropriation in aid, where materials and the issue of labor had to be imported. It came in form of product, but it was actually billed in form of money that has to be then earned in terms of foreign currency and repaid. Now, against a situation, if the government decided to do that A&A by tasking the domestic producers, that is probably the cement producing companies, the labor and all that, maybe domestic kind of farm, to implement the project with very minimal input, and then it is left with that budget, I mean the debt to service, which is already domestic. What it will do is that it will promote investment. So even if the cost of goods go up, definitely the income has also gone up. So the income will go up, the prices will go up because of increment in demand of goods and services, which are domestically produced. I agree, of course, that the carefulness has to be observed when it comes to the concept of borrowing by the public sector domestically. But as long as they are enablers, we are assuming the government has the good intention, because we have to look at it that this is a doctor that wants to heal the ailing economy, of course, with good intention to start with. So that is an assumption I'm making. And also the report did that the government then will have the good interest of the economy and therefore do the right thing. And if not the government, of course, we have we have the campaign from people of goodwill to force the right thing to happen. So that's an assumption we made. So this fear of domestic borrowing, it has to be demystified by the fact that we also have the internal expenditure of the same. First, why does the government has to borrow from a foreign sector? Of course, it has to borrow because it needs to import what therefore is needed to be used. And therefore, that concept and that fear and the issue of, I think Owino has called it like a hidden inflation, by the fact that the interest rate goes up. But remember, over time, we've seen that the interest rate has not actually in any way gone up. Even after, and I would want to put clearly, even after the decapping of the interest rate, there seems no to be significant increment. And in the document, it has noted that this lack of growth in interest rate is not because that there is a kind of macro management. It's the fact that the return on this the investment domestically seems not to be there, or it seems not to give any meaningful return, and therefore the borrowers are not even willing to borrow. So that the question of the domestic borrowing, or the fear of domestic borrowing, with good intention, I want to put that clearly, with good intention and the proper resource allocation, it then still stands to be a better option in my understanding. Of course, there are risks, as Owino has actually said it, there are risks in both sides. And this risk, I'm looking at them as a situation where there is but of course, along the way, I'm calling it a wood, an wood that needs to be healed, taken care of, and of course, with a lot of proper coverage and protection, it will, I feel it will heal. Then again, also, deflation of currency, and of course, the fear again of inflation, because the fear, the moment there is deflation, no, sorry, not deflation, but devaluation, allow me to put it in that way, a devaluation of currency, whereby, of course, Dr. Giduku said that we need to be really careful. I agree, we need to be really careful. And that's why I say it has to be done with a lot of carefulness and a lot of proper analysis and evaluation, because then again, it is not done all at once. It is in stages, and such that for imports that are necessary, and a good example, fuel, then we are able to we will be able to address them mainly by either cutting on taxes on them, or even some of them giving kind of subsidies. So it is possible. So therefore, I agree that a lot of care need to be taken. So rather than borrowing, remember we are borrowing to pay another debt, like what Owino has put to us. We paying a lot of interest, or more than that of our debt is, public expenditure, that is fiscal budget, is going to payment of the debt. To me, that's what I call playing a Ponzi game, where you borrow to pay. So you borrow more in order to pay less. And that's why you see in the data, the expenditure on development has not significantly changed over time. But in recurrent, because of this attachment on payment of debt, then keeps on going. So instead of playing this Ponzi game, and therefore suffering what I'm calling the cancer, that is the debt crisis and resorting to economic condition we are in, let's subject the disease to operation, and then along the way we can heal the wound. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Dr. Jaramba. And of course, you know, part of the concern is prudence is not a term we associate with this government. So whatever remedies we give, we have to bear in mind that there is no history of prudence or careful management. And you know, therein may lie our bigger crisis in terms of, can we trust this government, even with the best proposals, that they will do the right thing, you know, which is a political conversation. For today, we are sticking maybe to more of the technical proposals, and thank you so much for that. I have a couple of questions coming in from the chat. There are several, but some of them have already been answered. And one is from Andrew Miendo, who is asking, apologies. Yes, so the first question that he's looking at is, how can we stimulate local production so that we can deal with debt, you know, the rise in debt repayments in a more sustainable way, so that we can grow the economy? What can we do with local production to avoid more import production? And this is linking to the question that, or the point that was made by Dr. Geduku. So here we are saying, what are the tangible things that need to happen so that we can deal with that local production? There's also a question that had been shared with me earlier by Professor Gadi, who was asking, who suggested that one of our recommendations has to be to encourage regional trade and the building of value chains to keep Forex in the region and in the country. So here we are having questions around the building of trade. You know, so maybe that is something that Dr. Jaramba Kwame can also speak to. I'd like to open up briefly for one round of questions that maybe to clarify some of the issues that have been brought out. We are especially looking at the macroeconomic. We are trying to avoid the tax question because we want to get you on the call next week when we can focus very much on the tax issues, which taxes and what concrete recommendations, because we'll try and be as specific as possible. We are also getting out new, proposals on the way forward, which may open up questions, further points of discussion. But I'd like to open up briefly for anyone who has a concrete intervention to make, to please make it so that our Dr. Jaramba and the panel can answer it. After which we can then, move into the closing remarks from all of them. So if you have a question, kindly raise your hand and I will try and get to you. Thank you. Oh, wonderful. Yes, Professor Adi, I may have misrepresented you, and since you're here, you can make your interventions yourself. Karibu sana, please do take the floor.
Thank you so much, Wanjiro, and I'm sorry, as I told you, I was not going to be able to make the meeting, but I've been listening for the last half hour, and I have read the report, maybe not as closely as everybody on the call. So congratulations to the authors of the report. I have two related questions. The first one is what Wanjiro was posing. The report recommends easing of trade restrictions, but it's not very clear to me what that means. As you know, we import toothpicks and things like that. Is that what you mean? I mean, I think it's going to be some type of intermediate goods that are going to be used for to enhance manufacturing. I think it should be much more specific. The IMF and World Bank and WTO want us to open up completely, and the US FDA as well, which I think would be quite inconsistent with some of the Big Four agenda items and many other plans on paper. So that's one set of questions, and it's, I ask this not as an economist. I am an international trade law person who does also regional and sub-regional trade. And it looks like this report could benefit perhaps by engaging somewhat with some of the ambitions of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, some of the aspirations of the East African Community. Those I think are much more tailored for our specific circumstances. In any event, my second intervention, maybe since I was not in the call earlier, I missed this. It's about whether you can really disentangle all the very important questions about domestic law and domestic policy, all the technical issues that Wanjiro was mentioning, from the broader international context within which we borrow, where the incentive structures lead us invariably to all these problems. And so when I read the report, and perhaps because the mandate of this report was not to engage with those issues, I thought
I think I've lost Prof.
Yes, Prof, we seem to have lost you. I think Prof may have some connectivity issues.
Yeah, sorry, I got lost there.
Okay,
so,
then.
Yeah, so just to say that, the IMF itself acknowledges its debt sustainability analysis are problematic and they're reviewing them. You can talk about, and I know some of the many people who spoke on this call have talked about credit rating agencies and the ways in which their participation in credit rating affects the borrowing markets. The US Congress has been unable to tame the credit rating agencies. So I think that those structural questions at the international level are also very relevant. And I think the last thing I will say is the reason they're very relevant is because otherwise we dump on the state and its policies and its frameworks to the exclusion of this larger, broader context, which I think is invariably implicated as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Gadi. I'm looking for another hand, and as I wait for any other hand, I'd like to ask Emily. I'm not doing very well on the questions you've posed in the chat. Could you kindly take us through those questions? Emily?
Yes, Wanjiro, I can take you through the questions.
Thank you.
So the first question you already asked, what can we do with local production of products to avoid more import of production? Jedidah Wanjagi asks, any chance that we could avert the perceived debt crisis in Kenya? And then we have a question from Kennedy Mwangi asking, with the proposed structural adjustments proposing retrenchments and streamlining government parastatals, how much of effect will it have on the economy while the government appetite for expenditure is not cured? Those are the questions. There are some comments as well. So the first is that from Onindo Okello, that too much domestic borrowing by the government may overcrowd borrowing by the private sector. Kennedy Mwangi also says that domestic borrowing is bad for MSMEs, as lenders would prefer to lend to government vis-a-vis to MSMEs due to the default risks involved. Charles Kibigo says, the question about the role of legislature is a very relevant question, the role of legislature in providing oversight over public debt. In my view, Parliament is the biggest enabler of public debt crisis that is currently in Kenya. And if we are to avert the impending crisis, then we should validate public participation and say no to extravagant borrowing. Bernard Njiri has two comments. One says, you have explained how Kenya is losing market share due to a strong currency. However, if CBK allows currency depreciation with no FX intervention, it will result to a rise in the value of foreign currency denominated debt. This highlights the offsetting effect of the trade channel and financial channel. The second one is, he says, international macroeconomics postulates that for a country to float the exchange rate, monetary policy should be independent and capital mobility should be free. However, exchange rate depreciation in developing countries leads to sudden stops and reversals. Therefore, FX intervention and capital controls might be unavoidable for developing economies. Onindo Okello also asks if it's possible that we get a detailed report on Dr. Jaramba's presentation. Those are the questions so far. Questions and comments, sorry.
Thank you very much, Emily. Please drop a copy of the report in the chat. And like I said before, I apologize for the typos therein. We will have, we'll get a clean copy in the final copy, but the data is completely sound. So, with those round of questions and interventions, I think we get a very good sense of the concerns. And I think there are quite a number of them. We still have half an hour before the end. So I'd like to give Dr. Jaramba the first response, and then I'll invite Kwame, and then we can close with Dr. Giduku. So as you're giving your response, please also work in your closing remarks. The aim here is, as far as possible, to clarify the issues, if there's a challenge, to try and defend it, because we are trying to build a common understanding. Some of the areas we will come back to, because obviously this time isn't enough, but we will record all these questions and share them with Dr. Jaramba as part of the process of completing the report. So Dr. Jaramba, please take the first round. Thank you.
Thank you, Ajiro. Of course, the first question, of course, how to stimulate a local production. The remedy for local production is demand. First of all, you must create demand for local production. Of course, the demand is there. Like Prof has put it well, that we demand toothpick, but we import them. So the first thing to stimulate domestic production is to try and protect or make fair the ground by making sure that the foreign goods reflect the actual prices in relation to domestic prices. And that's why the concept of monetary policy is coming in. So of the Prof issue, whether the document talk about easing of trade restriction, I'm not sure, because at no point we offered such a solution. So if it is communicating that, the issue of easing, because it is already to the to the maximum, the easing of trade restriction. However, there is that element of supporting or substituting, let me call that offering subsidy to foreign produce, while the foreign the domestic production continue dwindling because of competition from. So the easing of trade restrictions in Kenya, from our analysis, they are already at their maximum. There is already complete flow of goods and services, flow of capital without much of restriction, and that's why we find that everything now domestically has to come from foreign market. The issue of credit ratings from Prof, and if I got that well, and of course facilitating the lending agents to continue lending domestically. I noted earlier on that the only interest of this lending agent is purely the profit that they are getting from it. Then again, there are those international laws that protect them from losing, just in case. So they are able to lead from credit ratings, which make sure that a given country continue to borrow. And you find that countries like Kenya, which would want to hide, is therefore getting a little green area in terms of borrowing. And that's why the commercial loans is on rise, because it is being rated well by IMF. And of course, we had that discussion earlier on, and there is already a question in terms of, is the data being provided by IMF the right one? Because you find that along the way, then it places Kenya far better than what even the Kenya data itself is able to give. So there is that question. So the credit rating and the lending agent, I think that one is an interesting area, whether the lending agents could be promoting maybe the debt situation of developing countries. Now, any chance that we can avert from debt crisis? Of course, it depends with what we do. Of course, from here, freeze of wages. I want to, because this one also Kwame mentioned about it, that the public sector has no option. For me, I think from my own understanding, that could also be quite a bit, unless we are talking about maybe controlling the growth of some kind of wages, especially like politicians, those unproductive sector. And I would say without fear that we have sectors we call rent-seeking sectors, and one of it is political sector. You find that at the end of the day, the output, whether they are 300, whether they are 20, maybe even the output could be better once they are 20 or less than when there are so many. So if you're talking about some sectors, being careful on terms of maybe the amount they use in terms of wages, then that one again. But remember, then we also need domestic consumers to demand again for what is domestically being produced. So at times we talk about freezing wage because it is used to consume on the import. But if we are making sure that over 80% of the domestic income is used or is consumed on domestically produced goods, then it can also as well be one of the stimulator for production or productivity. The crowding out question, I think that one we have already addressed, that of course, the government becomes part of income creation rather than income exporter. And therefore, crowding out, it is seen that it's possible to be managed. But we have said again that this one needs to be careful by the fact that the person that are implementing it are also using resources for the right role. The role of legislator, to me, that is where our problem lies. And this, from my own feeling, is that we need serious separations between, especially the executive and our parliament, because we are losing on the body that is supposed to be checking and actually giving a clear guidance once it comes to what the executive is doing wrong. So there is this issue of I don't know what I would call it, but I find that the legislator and the legislator and the executive are one and the same thing. And to me, that this is where the main problem lies. Do we still need our legislator in terms of oversight? Are they doing it? For me, I think they may not be helping much. So the monetary policy should be dependent. Of course, that's what you're saying, so that at the end of the day, then, is supposed to do its rightful role. Thank you so much. That's all I have. But just because you've talked about the making the final comments, if I take the opportunity, then to me, I think this, according to what we have in terms of discussion, if this is supposed to is able to be carried forward, and therefore it remains our focus, I think at the end of the day, for me, we are headed the right way. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jaramba. I want to invite Kwame to kindly respond to any of the questions, give your remarks, feedbacks, view, and also your closing comments as you do so. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I won't take much time. I think the question of credit ratings and the agencies and whether they provide perverse incentives for African governments to, or let me say specifically Kenyan government to borrow, is an interesting one, because I mean, if you look at the ratings of credit agencies, they put Kenya as a junk bond. I mean, the rating suggests that Kenya is a junk bond status. So they look at Fitch or the others. So I'm just wondering whether those ratings actually move one way or the other. So maybe that's a political economy thing to be pied, but I would think that if you look at the junk bond status in which Kenya has been, would that be an incentive for somebody to lend to Kenya? I'm not too sure, to be honest. I actually think that the roadshows that people in the treasury make, going up to, and I'm talking about the private side, going out for the Eurobond 1, 2, 3, and everything else, just as Kenya's debt situation was deteriorating, suggests to me that maybe we might need to unpack, but I would be completely circumspect in suggesting that credit ratings actually highlight and give people the impression that Kenya should borrow more. I mean, whoever is lending to Kenya probably just lends because we have a public sector that's not very good at negotiating, which is a capacity question and not necessarily. So their demand side, weaknesses, in my view, and that are very institutional, which brings me to my second point. You see, if you talk about some of the things that the government of Kenya signed to, regardless of the lending status and all that. So for instance, the Treasury, full of PhDs in economics, goes out there and actually negotiates with a lender somewhere in the in the US and all that, of course, the first bond, and simply states that if Kenya, for instance, was to seek debt relief, then it would be considered in default. I wouldn't sign that agreement. I mean, I wouldn't. So it's telling me that whoever signed that agreement either did not have the capacity to actually understand what the legal obligations they were making, or they did not care about the Republic. And that's where it comes down back to what Parliament does. Parliament gave authorization for these loans to be advanced without specifically holding Treasury's hand and insisting that regardless of what negotiations will be, we are not going to allow you to actually give sovereign commitments that go beyond this or that. So those are capacity problems in my view, which are political economy questions. And this is where I say that I think, and I must say this with respect, that many Kenyans have actually been looking to the external imperatives for why Kenya borrowed and ended up in the debt distress question that we have. I don't think they're external. I actually think 80% of the problem is domestic. And that's why we at the Institute of Economic Affairs have insisted on having this discussion, both with the Treasury on one side and with Parliament. It's far too easy for us. And actually, maybe I think some people who are responsible for this mess laugh when they see us backing at people out there, when they themselves actually seem to have gotten us into this dark alley while their eyes were wide open. So I'm not too sure that if you read the credit ratings, the economics of credit ratings, and look at how Kenya went about it, that those credit ratings actually had something to do with the debt problem that Kenya has. I'm not convinced about that. But I'll conclude with saying two things. One is if you look at it domestically, I question, and this is speaking for myself at the Institute of Economic Affairs, because the Central Bank of Kenya, because we were talking about monetary policy, the Central Bank of Kenya is the government of Kenya's agent, right? They say Treasury, but actually it's the government of Kenya's agent in debt procurement domestically. If you look at the way the debt market is, the domestic market, and of course every 2 weeks they give you, I'm not too sure that that market operates in the most transparent and the most competitive way, so that government of Kenya is able to get, as a big lender, as a big borrower, the best interest rates that it would get domestically. I'm not too sure, because it's supposed to be an auction market for which the agent is the Central Bank of Kenya. I'm not too sure it's doing its best to get the government of Kenya the best rates. Whether it's a capacity problem, I don't think it is. I actually think that the Central Bank is far too close to the big banks in Kenya in a way that undermines the public interest in terms of getting the government of Kenya the best credit rating. I mean, the best interest rates for credit. So let me tell you, for instance, this again is off my head. I just calculated very quickly. If the interest rate that the government of Kenya was to shift by 0.25 percentage points per year on some of the bonds that it bought last year, right? The total commitment would be something like, I think, about 30 to 40 billion shillings less. Now, you might say 30 to 40 billion shillings for the government of Kenya. Is that a lot? It is, because that is enough to pay for 80% of the free secondary education investment that government of Kenya makes. So my view is that there are tweaks that we can make as actors in Kenya and as citizens, because it's our taxes that pay for that. Let's ask every institution that is in the pipeline or the value chain of debt procurement in Kenya to actually do a much better job to get the government of Kenya the best interest. I hope that point is clear. The final point is, in my view, one thing that we also need to think about in terms of debt policy is debt. The problem with debt in Kenya was not just that the debt was large, certainly not. The problem in Kenya was that actually it was accumulated too fast, and the payment terms were, onerous over time. So maybe one of the things we need to ask ourselves is, government of Kenya or Treasury claims to be committed. Maybe it's for Treasury and for us as active citizens to ensure that the tenure of debt is stretched sufficiently, so the interest rate is fast, competitive, and the tenure of debt is stretched sufficiently to be able to actually prevent the kind of choke that the public debt is having, public debt redemption is having on public spending generally. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kwame. Thank you. That excellent comments. I'd like to then ask Dr. Kitutu to give us his any responses, interventions, and closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Wajiru. So I would wish to respond on how we can enhance domestic production. Is that the government needs to work on the business environment, which is a broad subject, because that will attract both domestic and foreign investors. And we know, for example, now that manufacturing is technology intensive, and through import, through FDI, we can be able to substitute some of these products that Kenya is currently producing through domestic production and even take advantage of the regional markets that are emerging. I also talked about domestic value chain. I'll give an example. We have minerals that have not been fully exploited because of some challenges. For example, iron ore. I know there is a billet, the first billet plant in Kenya under construction in Kwale County. It requires iron ore. So we need to start exploiting such minerals. Even we have scrap metals in government. If you visit some of these police stations, there is scrap. If there is, how can we convert some of these materials if there are no legal charges for use in domestic production? Agro-based value chains, I give the example. I can give two examples. Soya beans. We know the edible oils subsector in Kenya. We have large oil refineries, edible oils refineries, and they are able to substitute crude palm oil, whose prices have currently increased by almost 100% in the international market through soya beans production. We visited one manufacturer last year, and they were telling us they would have engaged about 10,000 farmers, but because the seeds were not there, they were only engaging about 800. And we know that this soya bean is also an input in the manufacture of animal feeds, which is a major cost for dairy farmers and other animal production, and we import from Uganda and Tanzania. And we know the challenges we have had, particularly cross-border trade. Another manufacturer producing juice informed us that they have, because the current mechanism counties that function is not taken seriously, they are engaging agronomists themselves to substitute imports of passion, which they are currently importing from Peru. Even with those efforts, they are just able to produce 1% of their requirement. So when we import, that is income we are losing to foreign countries. Those are just few examples. The global value chains. We know that is what is happening globally, that manufacturing has been unbundled into different components. And I am passionate about this. And I'll give examples of what we can look at that entire value chain and see what we can produce. For example, the main producer of active pharmaceutical ingredients is China. And India imports almost 100% of those active pharmaceutical ingredients from China to produce pharmaceutical, generic pharmaceuticals. And it's applying 70%, India, 70% of global requirement. Semiconductors is also another component that China, through its own domestic production, can only produce 16%, and it has to import the rest, particularly from China. And I'm glad that actually Dedan Kimathi University and through PPP framework, they will produce with an investor from US. So these are the things we need to think about. Another important instrument is the public financial institutions. For example, KIRDI, KIE, are those frameworks, are those institutions having the purpose for which they were created? For example, nurturing of startups, and we know that is where innovations and inventions will come in. The last 2 points is debt relief. From where I sit, I think multilateral efforts are required. For example, through African Union, the UN, US, and the EU. I think there is no incentive at the global level, but probably Kenya through EAC, AU can try to do that. So that the money that will be secured or the relief, that money should be ring-fenced to prop up the economy. So I think the debt problem is manageable, but as I indicated, from what I think personally, we need a 5-year plan to treat that problem so that Kenya can be back on a sustainable growth path. So those will be my closing remarks. Back to you, Wajir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Giduku. Thank you very much, Kwame Owino. Thank you very much, Dr. Jaramba, for helping us unpack this subject of fiscal consolidation. It's a big, broad topic. And we've tried to focus it. And of course, yeah, that, we've managed in some way, but these issues are so interrelated that we need to try and widen the view. Thank you for your excellent inputs and contributions. Thank you to all those who have joined the call and who have been with us for these 3 hours. Listening, interrogating, giving us your questions and your remarks. Thank you for showing that passion and commitment to your country and to contributing towards the change, which is what we are grappling to do here. I believe this conversation should have been, I know IEA held one as soon as this report was published. They held a citizen a conversation around the report. We continue to do so. And really the government should be the one spearheading these dialogues. I'm gratified and encouraged to see that Tobias Rasmussen, who is the regional representative of the IMF, is on the call. So, the IMF is listening to our, our submissions and our remarks. And as Kwame reminds us that there may be gaps in the global lending infrastructure, and some of these may have worked against us. But ultimately, I think it's very clear that it's our own leaders that have failed us. It's our own technocrats that are, really not doing what they're supposed to do. And that's really the bigger elephant in the room. The technical solutions, even just sitting here, are numerous. And the great ideas just coming out of this conversation are numerous. So as I hope we'll continue to journey together as we look at this question of political responsibility. Now, in concrete terms, our next steps are that we will take your feedback and questions, and these will be incorporated into the paper that we are developing. We intend to use this paper to engage Parliament, to engage Treasury, possibly to consider legal action should it come to that, and it may. But the first thing we want, and to also engage the IMF and other IFIs, because our aim is to contribute towards what we've recognized as a necessary process of fiscal consolidation, and to try and influence it so that it doesn't become a rubber stamping process. As Dr. Jaramba said, did Treasury enter into this program simply to enable them to stave off the inevitable crunch and to kick the can down the road through this process with no intention of meaningful reforms? And you get a sense of that when you see them talking about implementing restructuring and then not following the due process. They look like they're doing the right thing, but are they really? If they are not taking the time to engage stakeholders and to build the political will, that could really just be a higher level of tokenism and manipulation of processes than we've ever seen before. Very disingenuous engagement. So our aim is to use this paper to engage stakeholders across the board. We invited religious organizations. We are going to need to reach out much more stronger to academic, just to really get the public and state actor organizations on board, but of course, engage the oversight institutions. So your inputs will go into the paper to strengthen it. That will then go into engagement with these institutions and the follow-up actions. It will also go into our public communication, because you've been helping us and you're helping us refine our demands. We are not experts in this area by any stretch. And we are very happy, very glad to hear from the experts who have spoken to us today to help us refine our demands. The next step, like I said, is we have another conversation next week where we will look at the finance, the revenue raising measures, and really focus. The paper is very pointed and really critical of the IMF's continued emphasis on taxation, and the paper argues that Kenya has reached its taxation threshold, optimal taxation level, and that we need to be looking at efficiency instead and look at expenditure rationalization instead. So we're going to have that conversation next week with a view to, again, strengthening that aspect of the report. And so those are our concrete steps forward. I believe several other issues have come up, and we'll reflect internally to see if there is value in continuing these conversations and strengthening them, linking them maybe more to the policy sector, so that we can have a space for robust conversation around this very important process that's going on in our country. So with that, I'd also like to thank the TISA technical team, the programs team, and the ICT team for supporting this, and to thank Okoa partners for their continued contribution during the process leading up to this, and to wish you all a very good evening as we close, and to invite you to the continued conversations. We will share the outputs of this as we develop them. And with that, I'd like to say a big thank you and a very good evening, and enjoy your public holiday tomorrow. Happy Eid, and all the best for the evening. Thank you so much, and goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening.